gotta get back to... Man, I'm so bad at that.
Yep.
All right. All right. Boom! It's Hot Mike. Welcome to the show. We got Josh Greene in the studio. This is a pleasure and a privilege. Josh, you are somebody that I've worked with in the past. We both worked operations and logistics together, and I've always seen you as a true blue professional and also just a cool, interesting guy, and it really is a pleasure to have you in the studio tonight. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah. What have you been up to, man? It's been a couple years since we have really gotten to hang out and spend time together. And I know that you've got some irons in the fire as far as creative projects, and it sounds like you've been writing a lot.
Yeah. So I didn't always like writing. I didn't always like books. My high school was an international baccalaureate program.
Okay.
And it required a lot of reading. We had 3, 4, 5 summer reading books every year to do, and then, full reports on them. And I did not enjoy that process very much when it was thrust upon me. And then in the vacuum after high school, and after dropping out of college after a semester, I realized, I actually really like reading. And I discovered sometime in there that I liked writing also, but never considered it very seriously until sometime in 2020, I started to actually kind of write and write things. And then I started to realize that, there's, places on the internet that I can try to publish these things. And so I did. And the first one was kind of, it's a publication called Elephant Journal. And they accept submissions from anyone, and you can publish your stuff there, and then they kind of curate their own like magazine section of it that then they promote, and you build a following. And so I did that, and things started getting picked up, and then all of a sudden, like everything I put in, they were publishing, and that was like really eye-opening, like, whoa, like this is actually maybe a thing that I could do, and maybe the things that I want to say are helpful to some people. And the double-edged sword of internet publication is that you get to interact with your readers in a way that you don't in print. And then the downside is that you have instant access to all of the analytics about what you're writing. So instantly if it's failing or succeeding.
And that can be a bit of a mental trap in
totally.
itself.
It can be paralyzing if you don't kind of stop giving fucks about it. But anyway, I got, feedback from people, from readers that was like really cool. And I was like, I like this a lot. I like being able to help people. I like being able to articulate my perceptions and my experiences and translate that into something that can help people in there. At that time and even still, write a lot about relationships and sex and like all these things that I think are really fascinating, from a personal and a romantic and a kind of a scientific standpoint too. So hearing from people like, wow, this really, I'm sharing this with my partner because it's so well articulated, or, oh man, you really opened my eyes to a new perspective here.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff was really rewarding. So that was 2020, and I was actually dating a woman at the time who was also a writer, and she really kind of pushed me and encouraged me and was like, no, like you have something here. Don't just walk away from it. And then this year, my goal was to actually write the novel that I had started out writing last year, and secondarily to publish other places, because Elephant Journal, if you've ever read it, it can be pretty clickbaity. And it started to feel kind of whiny, kind of like I would get on to check stats or to publish pieces, and I'd see headlines and I'd be like, I don't like this at all. I don't want to be a part of this. And there are obviously great writers and good content on there as well. But on the whole, I started to feel like I didn't resonate with it. So I found Medium, which is a kind of it's like a blog platform that has publications within it. And then so the publications curate their own material, and then the platform curates its own material. And I did that and kind of had a similar string of escalation as with Elephant Journal. It was like things got picked up, and I made it into some of the bigger publications. And so anyway, I've been writing a lot for that, which is is cool for the engagement. And then on the side, I've been doing a lot of writing, like the thankless novel writing, where there's no gratification until it eventually arises from being published or going somewhere, which in a lot of cases with the most famous writers happens after you're dead. So, but
this is the slowest of burns.
It is the slowest of burns. Yeah, absolutely. But what I love about it is the process and the ability to spin a story over the course of 200, 300 pages, instead of fitting it into 1,000 words or less.
Yes. Yeah. Let's talk about process, because that's something that we really like to cover on this podcast, is about creative process.
Yeah.
How do you write in the broadest sense? Like, is location important? Is it time of day? Is there ritual before or after?
Yeah. So I think,
or none of the above.
Pretty evenly spread across all writers. The ritual before is to procrastinate until you can't anymore. You sit down, you check email, you call somebody, you pay your bills, you do anything you can to avoid writing. And I think for some, and in some places in life too, that's more or less true. And the reason behind that is because I think that when you're really writing, it's terrifying, because you're almost 100% of the time going to confront a piece of your own emotional experience in what you write, because I think that's why we write, is to process through that shit. And then the second part is that in order to tell a compelling story, you have to be pretty merciless and pretty direct with what happens. And I can talk a little bit about kind of how that showed up in the book that I finished last night, actually. The second one. Yeah. So I mentioned that, one of my goals this year was to write a book, and I did that, and I finished it in June. So I started writing another one, and
What's
I finished
the first
that
one
one last night. First one's called The Arid Road Home.
Okay.
It is it's a third person, kind of coming of age fable. So, if you've ever read The Alchemist, the way I like to summarize the simplicity of that book is that you only ever get two characters' names, three, I guess, in the entire book, right? And he's traversing a continent, meeting all of these people, but everyone is just referred to by the role that they play in the story, except for the main character, whose name you hear once in the first page, the woman he meets, and then this kind of direction-pointing character who appears once in the book too, and everyone else is just the so-and-so or the bread maker or the
it's their
alchemist
job title, but not
exactly. Yeah. So
name.
Everything is simplified down to kind of the trope, right, that they represent. So I was really kind of enamored with that style and the way it translated, and simple writing can appeal to a lot of people because it's not trying to be fancy. It's just trying to tell a story, right? So that's very much what it's about. Takes place in the 1860s in the American West. Young kid, 20 something, kind of aimless, not doing anything in life, gets bowled out of a bar and then mugged and kind of left for dead in the desert on the edge of this town. Wakes up kind of inexplicably healed and makes his way off to kind of find his life, realizing that he had been not actually living at all. And then through that process, finds another town and quits drinking, and these things kind of fortuitously happen for him in support of him, and he finds himself feeling like he should be happy, but he's really not. Like there's something missing. So he goes back out into the desert and fasts for like 9 days, and ends up in this very stream of consciousness kind of place where there's a lot of things happening, and some of it's dreams and some of it's reality, and it's difficult to distinguish between the two. And finally starts to feel like he's got a hold on who he is and where he wants to go, and walks out of the desert and kind of finds another town and settles into a lifestyle, and just feels finally the satisfaction of purpose, right? And of understanding kind of what it all means and what it's about. So so that's the first book.
Is any bit of it autobiographical?
I don't think you can help it. But
you got to put yourself into it.
So I mean,
did you experience a vision quest like this as a young man?
I did, yeah. Actually, not very long ago, just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people in modern in the modern world struggle to find their purpose and what they're really supposed to be doing. And, the big central question is, are purpose and vocation inextricably linked, or can they be separate and coexist, so that the thing you live for is not the thing you do to live necessarily, or to afford to live. So yeah, I have had elements of that searching. I think I resonate a lot with his emotional experience. And then a lot of the dreams and visions that he has are actually almost like scene for scene, like dreams and visions that I've had through my own process. One of which was I actually, in an attempt to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do with my life, I went into the desert in Utah in the fall of 2019 for 4 days and didn't eat and didn't drink very much and kind of just ambled around and it was cool,
Yeah.
And so so a lot of that comes from autobiographical, but it's not strictly like the other elements of his story are very different than mine. He doesn't have kids and I do, and he hasn't been married and I have, and so all of that. But
it seems like there's a threshold point where you reach where we all feel that level of hunger, and then you can break through to the other side, and then it's like there's clarity.
So much clarity. Yeah. So you've done this before.
A little bit, or I've read about it, and I've heard about these vision quests and what really can happen with long periods of fasting. Yeah. And it sounds like you really benefited from this experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it was interesting. Like I think to really tell the whole story would kind of spoil the story. But I think something that we've lost in our society is a willingness to engage in the mystical, and to understand that it's not always literal, that guidance is not always a literal thing, and that sometimes it's a chain of events. Sometimes it's like a wayfinding sign, and it's not saying this is the end point or this is where you're going. This is how you get the next piece of the puzzle. And that's really what I came out of the desert with. But yeah, you're right. It's, there's hunger, and then it actually doesn't take very long to push through that.
Okay.
And what happens is you enter a state of ketosis ultimately. And there are some physical symptoms of that, like you have kind of a bad taste in your mouth sometimes, or, but eventually kind of where you get to is this like very strange, very still hollowness where you don't feel hungry, you just feel empty. And then I think very often the first thought is, wow, we spend a lot of time eating and thinking about food. And why? Like, why are we so obsessed with this? And, biologically, it makes sense. It's helpful to be obsessed with food if you want to survive. But there's this kind of stillness and this clarity, and you become more of the watcher, I guess. More of the observer rather than the person really engaged in life, perhaps. So, yeah.
That sounds like a hell of an experience, and it's so cool that it made it into this first novel. Yeah, and a lot of the guidance that I got kind of from that experience, or the things that I, maybe learned about myself, ended up leading me to writing. And so it seemed fitting to me that the first thing that I wrote was kind of an homage to the process of becoming, and of figuring out where you go in your life and the kinds of things that you want to do. So now it takes you to the second book, which sounds like you finished last night. How exciting.
It's really wild.
Can you talk about this book? Or
I would love to talk about
Fantastic. Awesome.
So that, and we were talking about process, and writing the first one was my first novel, right? So I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea where it was going. I started out with kind of a rough outline and referred to it throughout the process, and I mostly stayed pretty true to it. But I also learned something about what it's like to be an active participant in writing a novel. And when I say that, it's in a very literal sense, because you're not the only writer. I think there's this idea that you create characters and then you kind of manipulate these characters around the environment that you also create. And I think if you're ever going to write something that's really true to life and that is believable, it's less about creating the characters and more about finding them, more about seeing them, understanding them, right? Because they're people. And there's some crazy shit that happens when you write true characters, and then they're in an environment, and you may have even created all of that, but then they start to kind of act of their own accord. You know, the things that they say come from their personality rather than you yourself as the writer.
Yeah.
And at least in my experience and what I've read of other novelists is you get in this place where it starts to move of its own volition, and you're kind of just trying to keep up, which is like a really cool experience. So yeah, and that's very much what happened with the book that I just finished. I don't really have a good name for it yet because the book I started out writing is not the book that it ended up becoming.
Ooh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, and so I mean, specifically what I mean by that is when I started out with the idea, the title I had in mind was Unholy Matrimony.
Okay.
And it was about a guy who by all accounts seems like a really great person who is leading the most debaucherous sexual life outside of his perfect marriage, with the intent of making people question what is good and what is bad. Like, with regard to, staying true to your marriage, staying true to yourself, having multiple partners, what it's like to be a parent engaged with another human, and not to necessarily justify extramarital affairs or to make them okay, but to really push people to consider a multifaceted humanity where there's a lot of gray area, and it's difficult for someone to be just good or just bad.
Right.
And what ended up happening is I created this character, this male character, and he couldn't do it. It wasn't him.
Yeah.
It wasn't him to do that. And so it morphed into this really beautiful love story between two people. I think the kind of love that a lot of us kind of fantasize about, men or women, where things fall into place and they feel right and you overcome challenges, and then he gets confronted with an opportunity to be unfaithful and resists it with everything he is and everything he has, and it happens anyway, and then he's kind of sucked into it. He ends up telling his wife, they have 4 kids, they've been together 16 years. They met and got married in the same month and just have this like really happy, beautiful life, right? Like they're the kind of couple that you see walking down the street and they're just solid together, right?
Yeah.
And then he has this affair and he tells her and it crumbles everything, right? So he feels it all fall apart. And she goes out seeking, her own truth and really sets out to try to figure out a way to get over him and their life together and figure out how to be a parent with him, but not with him.
Yeah.
And she ends up kind of coming to a surprising conclusion through this and through the experiences that she has. So this one is third person omniscient. So you're inside the hearts and emotions and minds of every character.
Yeah.
Which is a really fun thing
even the
to
children
write.
As well,
to an extent.
Okay.
Yeah. So they play a role, and there's I think, having been through a divorce myself, hopefully the children are not involved in the process very much at all. And I think also to an extent it behooves the parents to act of their own truth, as much, if not more, than in the best, the supposed best interest of the kids, for the sake of coming out of it with at least 2 whole happy parents.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, we get these glimpses of, the eldest child who's, an early teenager, and she kind of begins to recognize what's happening and realizes that her parents need her to help with the little ones and kind of keep things steady, but she also becomes a driving force and kind of how it evolves. And so it's really it was a fun story to write, a very excruciatingly painful story to write.
It sounds like it.
There were a lot of the way I fit this all in is I wake up at 5 and I write for an hour or 2 before work.
Wow. Okay.
And so, if you're like, there's a very early on, John and Annabelle are the kind of the two main characters.
Mm-hmm.
Early on in their marriage, she gets pregnant, and then she's in a car accident at 6 months, and they lose the baby, and she has to deliver it after it's no longer living. And so there's this whole sequence of this stillbirth.
Yeah,
and
that's heavy.
I remember like I can almost taste the morning that I wrote that, and it messed with me for like a week, because it was like, it was like I had lived it from 3 different people's perspectives. But that also, I think, is, I mean, if it's not going to move people, then it's not worth writing, really. I don't think so. Yeah. So yeah, it was hard. It was like this labor, right? To like dig in and write this in a way that felt real, because every word that you type out is like bringing you deeper into the experience of what it would actually be like to deliver a dead child, or to be, the husband of someone delivering a dead child, or to be the best friend of the husband of someone delivering a dead child. So, and then I don't know, I guess even in the scene where the affair first starts, writing, like feeling the despair, the betrayal of this person going against such a beautiful relationship, having spent 40,000 words creating this beautiful relationship, and then all of a sudden you have to kind of dash it to bits. Faulkner says, in writing, you must kill all your darlings, and it's like absolutely true, because if you don't have the courage to do that, you end up with really nothing much of interest happening at all.
Yeah,
which isn't life either,
and probably not characters with genuine dimensions to them.
Right, exactly.
Like if you really keep them on their pedestal, and you keep them in their glass case, and they remain untouched.
Right.
Like as you were talking about gray, and this sounds like a true exploration of the gray zone.
Right.
And that's reality. That's life.
Yeah.
That is the balance. Is we are kind of both sides.
Right.
Of this, and it makes up a whole person.
Yeah. And
I do think, I mean, it does sound like challenging material, but like it's about real life and growth and evolution and devolution and kind of new beginnings and the end of a chapter.
Yeah.
Do you have a working title right now?
I don't. Okay. I don't really have any idea. The last one I just titled it Joseph, which is the main character's name. And I called it that the whole time I was writing. All the manuscript copies were titled that, and even all my pitch materials are Joseph synopsis, Joseph one whatever. And I just kind of at the very end I was like, I need an actual name for this thing. So I chose the Arid Road Home, and with a lot of input from family and friends who had read the early copies, and excuse me. So yeah, for this one, I just finished it last night, like I said, and what comes next is months of rereading and editing and kind of putting everything back into its place. And I think you kind of find your tone and your cadence over the first handful of chapters, and so it'll be a process of going back and making the beginning align with the rest of it and how it ended up. And I hope that through that I can kind of figure out what it needs to be titled and all of that. So.
Do you have trusted people like that operate as your editors or close confidants that can read this and really give you feedback that you are seeking out? Like that they're going to tell you the hard things that you don't want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
Not very many. I try not to have many friends at all, because I don't have time for them, which is just a really honest assessment of what I've come to. Is like, okay, I have X number of hours in my life, and these are the things that are important to me, and having many relationships is not one of them.
Yeah.
But I have a couple, and what's interesting about this process, it's been interesting to have written 2 books in a 10-month time frame. The first 5 months, when I was writing the Arid Road Home, I was mostly single and mostly writing like by myself in my bedroom, like focused on the computer and getting words out, right? And then when it was done, I was like, cool, like family, friends, like here's a copy, read it. And most of them were like, oh, this is great. And then my dad sent it to my aunt, who's an author actually. And she was like, hey, can I pick this apart for you? And I was like, please. So she did like a full copy edit, a full tone edit. And she and I kind of went back and forth on that. But I didn't share any of it with anyone until I had written it and edited it 2 or 3 times and was finally ready to send it out.
Yeah.
And with this one, I've been dating a woman named Danielle since, roughly March, and we're now a little bit more serious. And so through the process of writing this, I've talked to her a lot about it and who the characters are and the kinds of things that they might do. And, writing omniscient perspective for a woman in this situation was interesting because it's all presumed. I've never been a woman that I can remember. And so it's all like, well, this is what I think she might experience.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I've done over the kind of the second half of the book is almost as soon as I have written something, I'll read it aloud to her. And reading aloud what you've written is a really great way to make sure it makes sense, make sure it's readable, and then also making sure the dialogue is believable, right? Like, I think we have a tendency as people to kind of aggrandize the words we say in dialogue, because we don't actually talk like most dialogue.
No. You're so right.
And so, reading it aloud to her has been great. And also to gauge, like, okay, is she sucked into this? Like when I end, it was so funny. Just a couple of days ago over the weekend, I wrote a huge chunk of it over the weekend. But I was reading it to her and I got to the end of what I'd written and she was like, what happens next? I was like, I don't know. Like, I haven't written it yet. This is the end of it was like an unfinished highway, and you're like barreling along and then all of a sudden it's done. And she was like, no, it can't be done. That can't be the end of it. So yeah, that's been a huge help.
Yes.
And a cool addition to the process that I really like is sharing it as it's being created with someone who I trust a lot. To also say, call me out and be like, no, I don't think that's believable. Or, this person wouldn't do that. And
what a valuable resource.
Yeah. Really. Yeah.
Like, certainly there are certain artistic processes that lend itself more to this person who can call you on your shit. I think there are probably some of these processes that are, you're completely alone. You're an island.
Yeah.
And whether you're a painter, whether you're something like that, like, this is still, it's up to you. It's your vision. With this, with narrative, with storytelling.
Yeah.
It's so important to have somebody that you trust who can tell you the honest truth, whether you've gone astray with a character or with a storyline.
Yeah.
Did you always see yourself as a storyteller? Like, has this been... No,
not at all. I've always been kind of uncomfortable with people, actually. And so I've noticed a lot more than I've been willing to tell. So I feel like I've always been very observant of people, but reluctant to tell the stories back to them. Because I have found that I perceive things that people don't necessarily want to be told back, which I think in writing is very useful and very valuable. And in interpersonal relationships can be very damaging.
Because it's a level of honesty.
Exactly.
A little bit beyond what would construe as kind.
Absolutely.
This is brutal.
Yep.
At times.
Yep.
But it's honesty.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the solitude piece is that 5 a.m., sitting at my desk and it's like dark outside and cold and I'm just like in this zone. And it's in the discovery really of what happens next in the story.
Yeah.
And then, but having it kind of unfold a chapter at a time and reading that to her is like, it's invaluable. It's very, very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm curious, when we first started the conversation, you were talking about getting into reading. What was the style of writing that you were drawn to in the early stages, even if it's specific to specific authors? Is it similar to what you're writing now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the process for writing articles versus books is obviously very different, and the voice that I assume for each is also very different. And in articles, I tend to sway more toward kind of a poetic, flowing prose, that tells a story with this passion and conviction. And I think in a novel, that gets really tiring really fast for the reader. And I've read things like that, and I didn't really particularly enjoy them. So in writing, in I guess what I would call a long form, and in reading it, I have been drawn to. At first, it was the simplicity, right? It was The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, and that's really what came through in the first book. And in this one, I started reading Faulkner, and his writing is this visceral, guttural. Like, he combines words, and he chooses not to use punctuation here and there because it gives it more of a gritty sense. And this is not a Faulkner book, right? Because it's not really, really depressing. And this like harsh narrative of the reality of life, I think, as he sees it. But I liked that. I liked, sentences that build upon each other, going deeper and deeper and deeper into the experience, and looking at this one emotion from 3 different angles before moving on. That struck me when I started reading that. It was this huge, almost 180-degree departure from this simplistic kind of fable-like storytelling, right? Into this, we're going to go all the way in to every single emotion. And by the time you get out of it, you're going to feel really raw. And so I jumped into that like with both feet for this second book. And I think that I could probably write 5 different books, 10 different books, 15 different books in 5, 10, 15 different voices, because, and I don't necessarily think it's, like a good characteristic of myself, but I'm really, really impressionable, right? So and it's been this way with music too. I'm a musician, and the more of one artist or musician that I listen to, the more I find myself emulating those, the tone and the ornamentation and the flow of their music. And it's the same with accents. If I'm around someone that has a strong accent, I will start to talk like them. And it's not necessarily mimicry. It's just, I'm too pliable, right? Like I don't have enough of this is who I am. This is how I'm going to do it. It's like, well, I'm just going to kind of blend in wherever I am. So towards the end of writing this book, I started reading Hemingway and also Bukowski, and both of them in their own way have this very direct, very honest, simple, but not naive way of speaking. Right. And so I would anticipate that probably the next thing I write will be closer to that and less of the visceral. But I'd like to find a middle ground. I think is kind of where I'm heading. So yeah.
Do you have a goal as far as? I mean, I love that the number of books just multiplied.
Yeah, right.
Like, every time by a factor of 2. Like, it was like, I love that you have this. You're like, I could just keep writing.
Yeah.
And especially so far, your first 2 books, you've turned them out pretty quick.
Yeah.
Is this just going to be something that you want to dedicate? Like, I know you're such a disciplined guy.
Yeah.
Do you think this writing schedule will continue, and the goal will be turning out novels like every year, every 2 years?
Yeah, I think so. I have a whiteboard in my kind of little writing studio office, glorified attic, that has the kind of the title and synopsis of the next like 5 books that I want to write. And each of them touches on a piece of my experience that I feel like I need to get out on paper in some way. And I love the process of writing novels. Like it's really therapeutic. Selfishly, it's very therapeutic. And I think that probably, to be a little bit kind of truthfully narcissistic, I think that the things that I've lived through could help other people with their experiences too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's this desire to like produce something that has value to other people. You know, it's the legacy
Mm-hmm.
quest, right? It's like I want to leave something behind of
Sure.
myself to help guide other people through
Yeah.
what they're experiencing. But yeah, no, I don't think I have like I want to write 10 books in my lifetime. It's like I want to keep writing as long as things keep coming to me.
That's good.
As long as ideas keep coming. And shoot, if I could find a way to turn this into the only thing I did, and I could put all of my energy and attention into like experiencing the world around me and then translating that into book form,
Mm-hmm.
that'd be great.
That'd be the dream.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In the meantime, you know, I've got 5 to 7 a.m.
Yeah.
every day, and
That's your time.
That's my time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm really disciplined about it, I'm at the point now where once I'm moving, right, like once I have the central construct of what the book is about and kind of who the characters are, I can very easily do 2,000-3,000 words in those 2 hours. And so, you know, the average novel is 55,000 words. And if I'm doing, you know, even if I just write 4 days a week, that's 12,000 words. That's like a month,
Mm-hmm.
a novel a month, right? If I'm really, really writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's exciting to me, right? Because it's like it feels attainable all of a
Mhm.
sudden. And then the last 10 months have shown me that, yeah, that's actually like, that's pretty good. And I've also written, you know, 50 articles and managed to edit and read a bunch too. So yeah, it's this, at least right now, it's this like very rich component of my life that I don't want to give up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I bet the first novel will always be the most difficult. Like the fact that you proved it to yourself. Like there will be new challenges because you're going to keep putting them out in front of you.
Right. Yeah. So the mental game for sure. It's
Yeah.
like most people that I've told that I'm like, oh yeah, I wrote a book, or like I'm writing a second one.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, oh my God, I can't even imagine like writing that much. And I'm like, it doesn't even feel like, it doesn't even feel hard. At the beginning, yeah, I was like, absolutely. Am I going to lose interest? Am I going to lose motivation? Am I going to lose inspiration?
Yeah.
Halfway through this, and then I have, 70 pages of something that's totally useless, and the story never even resolved for me. But seeing it just develop and come to fruition almost of its own accord, you know, with me just showing up, and the creativity being at work, that was cool. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, now that it's like tattoos, like now that it's started, like I just want to keep doing it.
Let's just do it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I liked how you talked about the whiteboard and that kind of the skeleton or the framework is coming together for the next novel.
Yeah.
It reminds me of what Paul Thomas Anderson, the screenwriter and fantastic film director, talks about. This is screenwriting, not writing novels, but he talked about when it comes to his next project, and I think he was asked in an interview, like, how do you deal with the blank page? Mm-hmm. And his response was, there's never a blank page.
Right.
He was like, absolutely never. He's like, that's the thing I fear the most. Mm-hmm. There's always a seed of an idea written on that page. And I maybe wrote that seed 7, 8, 9 years ago.
Right.
It's been living in this notebook. And I'll just keep going back to it and revisiting it. And then suddenly it will take off. Right. And it will become, it will absolutely consume me. And it will be all I can think about. Yeah. And then I tell the entire story and boom, I've got a movie.
Right.
And he was talking about There Will Be Blood lived on a page in a notebook for like 15 years. Wow. He knew the seeds were there, but the story hadn't come to him. The character of Daniel Plainview wasn't there yet, right? But it was growing and it lived on that page.
Cool.
Do you feel that way too? Like you?
Yeah. So to an extent, right? I especially when I'm writing a lot of articles, and it seems to come in like 6-month increments where I'll be like, oh, I have all these ideas and I'm gonna write them all and then I'm gonna publish them all, and then that'll kind of die out and then I write the novels, right? But what I found with the articles is that I'll have so many ideas and I'll keep a list in my phone, like, oh, I want to write about this. I want to write about this. And if I don't actually get to them in a relatively quick time frame, I lose the passion behind the idea. Yep. And I try to write it and I could write it, but it comes out dead. And so Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, has a book
Hmm.
called Big Magic, which is all about the creative process.
Okay.
It's very, very good. It's also really quick to read
Cool.
because she's such a fantastic writer. But in it, she talks about this concept that ideas are these entities that kind of float around looking for a host,
Yeah.
and they're impartial to who makes them manifest. They just
Yeah.
want to be made manifest. And so if they inhabit someone for a time and that person neglects them, they drift off and find someone else. And she has a handful of like really tangible, very cool experiences that she personally has had with that.
Mhm.
One of which was she got this idea for a novel and she started to write it, and then life happened and she got distracted, and then comes to discover that Ann Patchett, who she meets at a writing conference, years later has started to write almost exactly the same book.
Wow.
And they had never talked about it, right? And she's like 100 pages into it at this point. And the characters are very similar, and the names and the places and like all of it is very, very similar. And it's some obscure topic, right? And I don't know if I believe in that in the literal sense, but I've definitely noticed that if I don't work with an idea,
Yeah.
I lose it.
Yeah.
And so I've started to try to keep track less
Yeah.
of the article ideas specifically, but the books is like it's a big thing, and I think it's a little bit more kind of tailored to my experience, and that's why I'm thinking of these ideas, right? So yeah, I'll be curious to see, after I write the next one or the one after that, like how many of these ideas have fallen off the board
Yeah.
because they're not alive for me anymore.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it's been interesting over the last 6 months or so to see some of those ideas kind of shift, right? And also evolve. One of them, there's this word that I learned, it's limerence, which is this kind of unrequited longing for somebody, like this almost borderline obsessive longing for someone that doesn't feel the same way about you. Limerence, yeah.
Okay.
And I read about it and I was like, whoa, like this is a book, and it's about an ended relationship of mine that went on and off for 3 years, and was really hard to release. But as I've gotten further away from that relationship, the emotion behind it has also stabilized. And so this, I was going to write the book as a letter, basically, a long drawn out first person letter, and it's not there anymore. But also within it, there's still this concept of obsession, right? Which is powerful and lurking in a way, right? And haunts all of us to a degree at some point in our lives, I think. And so the concept of obsession, of limerence itself, is very much alive, right? And so I'm feeling that evolve in certain ways. So yeah.
Wow.
So I don't know. It's a little bit of both.
I think it's interesting that these ideas can have like a shelf life, and if they sit too long on the shelf, they change.
Yep.
They start to change into something else.
Yep.
Or they expire.
Right. Yeah. It's like cheese, right? So like especially soft cheese, like it starts out and then it gets better and better, and then at a certain point it just stops being good altogether, and you have to let it go.
That's got to be a painful part of the process too, when you have to, like, if there was some real deep connection to that original idea, like this is a character, or this is going to be somebody's arc, and then it's like you put it up on the shelf, and then you're like, I'm not there anymore. I gotta release this.
Yeah,
a little piece of me's dying, but I gotta let it go. I gotta let it go.
Yeah, I think I've written enough things from. So Mackenzie, the writing woman that I dated, she always said, write from your scars, not your wounds. Like, nobody wants your blood. And I think that, especially having just written this most recent book, and having written it from a lot of scars that I had finally worked with, right? Like, I had worked through those things, and they weren't painful anymore in the same way. They weren't excruciating in the same way. They were still sensitive and deep, but but scars, not wounds. And so seeing some of these ideas age out, for lack of a better word, as
Yeah.
they become more healed, I look at it and I'm like, yeah, maybe at the point in time that came up for me, I could have written it, and it probably would have been pretty bloody and pretty incoherent, and pretty unhelpful to anybody, especially me, because you can tell, right? Like, you can tell when someone's written something, and it's just, I don't know, it's too self-absorbed, and it's too victimized, and it's too like, and then you can read something from someone who's really lived through it and come to terms with it and understood it, and it's powerful, at least in my experience. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to like let go of ideas and be like, oh, I could have written that. But then the thing that really makes that worth it is that I know that as soon as I release this bucket of ideas, this whole new one fills up, because I'm not trying to make old things work that don't want to work anymore. I'm like open to what's coming to me right now. And that's cool. It's like this probably unrealistic confidence that there will always be more ideas, but I believe it. I believe that it's true, and so far it has been, and I've done my best work trusting that. So
I love. I'm just stuck on the scars, not wounds, and I like that.
It's
just
good,
seems,
right?
That's a great. Those are great words of wisdom, and I don't know if this analogy works. But what I'm thinking of is like somebody telling war stories while they're still in the trenches,
right?
Rather than they're home for a year and they've really gotten to process, and now you're getting a different version of a story than shells are still going off all around you, and you're still bleeding.
Right.
Like you're still wounded from this. So your perspective is not clear.
Right.
You are still very much in this, and your process, though maybe if you see a glimpse of it, it might be an interesting examination.
Yeah.
But as a teaching point, scars teach you. Wounds, you're still just staring at it.
Right. Well, the scar is integrated. The wound is the wound itself is open and disconnected. And Joy Williams, the female singer in the Civil Wars, was talking about kind of her writing process, and she lost her father, and that was really impactful to her, and she really wanted to write about it. She really wanted to sing about it. And a songwriter who she worked with a lot said, like, you won't be ready to write about this for like 3 years. Oh, wow. And sure enough, she tried, and it didn't come out, and it wasn't there. And then 2-3 years later, she finally was able to write something that was actually true to what she had felt.
Yeah.
And I think we're afraid that we're going to like forget these emotional experiences and not be able to write about them deeply. But it's all there. It all comes back.
Yeah.
And again, it's that trust, it's like, I'm going to let this resolve, trusting that I'm going to remember the way this specific memory felt and tasted and showed up in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question to ask you, and maybe this is a good one to kind of finish on, but it ties in fatherhood.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about and writing about and exploring in The Gray is, it's not all pain, but it's painful. And it's a painful exploration, but it's a very necessary one. Yeah. As you are raising little ones, little people, to become good human beings,
right?
It takes that full experience and that richness of life that includes pain as well as pleasure, as well as like comfort, discomfort, all these things. How do you approach that as a father, knowing that some of the most important experiences are the ones that hurt you the most? And I'm sure I'm not a father, but as a parent, I'm sure there is an overwhelming instinct to protect those little people that are part of you from pain, from discomfort. What is that like to wrestle with that? And or is there an acceptance around it at a certain point?
Yeah. I think that I have always taken a little bit of a non-conventional approach to that specific aspect of parenting.
Yeah.
Because I have learned so much from my hard experiences. that I wouldn't have learned otherwise, that have made me a richer, better person. And I think the thing that I want to impart on my kids is the ability to learn from pain, right? And avoid unnecessary, stupid pain. Like there are some things that it's like, this could be avoided with some self-awareness. This could be avoided with an external perspective. And most of it you can't avoid. You just got to live through it. So when I approach painful experiences that my kids have had, some of which were inflicted by me in the course of, being divorced and them being in the middle of it. I mean, not in we didn't use them to fight for us, right? Like it's all been very, very healthy in that regard. But there's still kids in a broken home, for lack of a nicer sounding word. But the thing that I want them to feel from me is acknowledgement, right? That, oof, this hurts. It hurts a lot. And then a couple of things from that, like, what can we learn? What do you need in the moment to be okay? And how can we continue to function as we work this out, right? So it's not, we need to push this pain down. We can't feel pain. We just power through. It's also not, let's sit in our rooms for 3 weeks and wallow. It's like this medium where it's like, okay, how do we continue to live, continue to be good to each other, even though we might be hurting, and give ourselves the space to process through it. Because if you push it down, it's never going away. And if you wallow in it, you're going to do yourself a lot more harm, I think. So how do you accept and continue to function and ask well for what you need? So yeah, there's no sense that, pain is bad. There's also not a lot of acceptance of pain will cripple us beyond repair. Yeah. Right? It's like, we can do hard things is a common statement in our house. And how do we learn and continue to get better? Not how do we be perfect, but how do we learn from everything we do, good and bad. Yeah.
I don't like this when it's pushed on it like you're kind of this perfect thing and the world should accept you.
Right.
I feel like that is not really leading us in the right direction, where we're going away from self-improvement,
right,
and away from reflection
Yeah.
upon our characteristics, our own actions, and say, right, can I do better? Mm-hmm. And almost always the answer is going to be yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everybody can all the
mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah.
So it's like this paradox, right? Because can I do better? Yes. Am I good enough? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like,
there you go. Yeah.
And so, fortifying this sense of self, this sense that hard things happen to good people all the time. And how do we be better humans about it next time?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we definitely don't run from pain. We dive right into it most times.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a conflict between the siblings, it's like, all right, here's what I see from this person. Here's what I see from this person. How might you feel in this situation? What about this might be hard, or so-and-so is being a bully at school. It's like, well, what's their home life like?
Mm-hmm.
What do they bring in their lunch? Not so we can judge people, but so we can acknowledge, wow, maybe there are clues here as to why this certain thing is hard for a certain person, and how do we develop compassion and empathy and just give a little bit more acceptance, I think, to the way things are. And that's hard and it hurts, right? So it's easy to want to avoid it, but it's also not very helpful to avoid it.
Yeah, avoidance. That's not what you're teaching in these books.
No. Yeah, I think that's another part of it is like, we get through hard things. We get through painful things.
Yeah.
And sometimes in a culture that does a lot of suppression and avoidance of discomfort in general, I think sometimes kind of reopening those things for people can be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
It can remind them that, this is a thing that I still need to work through a little bit more. And yeah,
absolutely. Well, I really appreciate the things that you are addressing and confronting in these books. And what's a way for people to find the Arid road home?
That's a great question. I don't have a way yet.
Okay. Okay.
I'm pitching it right now. I have this sneaking suspicion that it might be a little bit too obscure for the mainstream market to want to pick up right now. The second book that I've just finished and will be editing over the coming months is, I think, more sellable in a modern market. So who knows what happens to that first book? You know, it might sit in my desk drawer for a handful of years and then eventually make its way out into the light.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So yeah, that you can't
okay.
find it.
Hey, that's okay. Hey, it is the beginning. I can't wait to hear what the title is for the second book.
Yeah.
I'm so excited for this next phase for you as you're editing and really kind of finding this book and keeping the structure exactly how you want it to be.
Yeah.
And maybe at the end of that process, when it's going into publication, I'd love to have you back on to discuss it more.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Josh,
Cool. Thanks,
this
man.
has been great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Cheers.
This has been Hot Mike, and we're out.